Hi, everybody. Today's Tuesday, September 9th, 2025, and our friends Pepe, Escobar, and Professor Marandi are back with us. Welcome back.
Hey, everybody. And this is the Mao Mug. What I'm saying is the revolution is not a dinner party, as Mao used to say, but it can start with Mao in a teacup.
Yeah. Please subscribe and hit the like button to help us reach more people. And let's start, Professor Marandi, with what's going on with the case of Qatar. Israel attacked Qatar, bombed, and they wanted to kill the head of Hamas in Qatar. And we know that the defense system of Qatar didn't do anything. And the United States, what has happened in your opinion? What was the main? Why did the United States? Do you feel that the United States informed the government in Qatar and they didn't? They're somehow showing pretending that they didn't know about it.
I think Pepe wants to say something.
I talked to some of my Americans and they say no, they did not tell Doha.
Yeah.
You
There
know,
you go.
it really doesn't matter. Do you think that if the Americans had told Qatar that it would have made a difference? Or do you think the Qatari government would have informed the leadership of Hamas to stay away from that building? They would have stayed silent and stayed out of it. Qatar, unfortunately, like the Emirates, although they hate each other, like the Saudis, although they hate each other, like the Bahrainis, although they hate each other, they're proxies. The United States has no respect for them. The emperor came to Qatar, he came to the Saudi Arabia, he came to the Emirates, and they all gave him gifts and billions of hundreds of billions of dollars, if not trillions of dollars, were promised. Whether they have that money or not, that's a completely different issue. The Qataris gave him a $400 million plane, and what did he do? Nothing. Being a U.S. proxy does not mean that you are safe and secure. Tomorrow, the Israelis can bomb Riyadh and take out Mohammed bin Salman. They can take out the leadership of Qatar. They can take out Mohammed bin Zayed, and no one in Washington will stop them. And these regimes will collapse because they're family dictatorships, they're clans. They will fall apart. In the case of Qatar and the Emirates, they have more indentured servants and slaves, far more indentured servants and slaves than they have citizens. Everything will fall apart. So this just shows, and I personally think that this was a foolish move, and it does not serve the interests of the Israeli regime or the United States. It definitely serves the interests of Netanyahu, just like all the wars have served his interests. But none of the wars have served the interests of the empire or the Israeli regime as a key element or part of that empire, because they have discredited everyone who is associated with the West. Everyone has been discredited now. No one in the Western camp is safe, no matter how obedient they are. Erdogan, by supporting the United States in its dirty wars and its expansionism across the region. Saudi Arabia, decades of supporting the US policy across the board. Qatar doing the same, each in their own different way. The Emirates, none of them are safe. Do you think that the United States is going to sanction the Israeli regime? Do you think the European Union is going to marginalize Netanyahu and the regime tomorrow after what they did to Qatar? Qatar has funded all these politicians, given them lavish gifts. Whenever a senior Western politician goes to Qatar, they go back with enough money to buy an expensive car, at least. At least. They give them golden wristwatches that are pure gold. They buy off everyone as far as they can, as much as they can. But To what purpose? To what's the use? You can be bombed and no one will do anything about it. Not a single air defense system was activated. But the tragic thing is that, does anyone think that the Al Udeid Air Base in Qatar, which hosts CENTCOM, the forward base of CENTCOM, does anyone think that the Qataris are going to ask the Americans to leave? Are the Americans going to be asked to leave anywhere in the Persian Gulf region after this? Of course not, because these are proxy regimes. They do not have popular support. In the Emirates, people support the Palestinian resistance, but the Emirati regime condemns the attack in Jerusalem or in Al-Quds. They've been murdering 100 Palestinians a day in Gaza for 2 years now. And the Emiratis don't put out statements. They only put out a statement when a few Israelis are killed. But that is not going to help them. If the Israeli regime, if and when they decided to make a move against the Emiratis, is any of this going to help them? No, of course not. So this is I think, a very important moment, a historic moment. It is a key moment. Qatar and Erdogan, they did everything possible to help the Americans in this region. And they're, by the way, they're not allies of the resistance. Qatar helped undermine the axis of resistance in Lebanon, in Syria, and in Yemen. Qatari television, Al Jazeera, shows sympathy for Palestine, but it does not fund the resistance. It doesn't help the resistance. And the only reason why Qatar and Turkey host politicians from Hamas is because the Americans let them do that. It's because the Americans think that this way they have a bit of leverage. Because Qatar takes care of Palestinians, they give them good places to stay, they give them funding, and that way the Americans believe that they can create divisions between the political wing and the military wing, which so far has failed. But that has been the objective. If the Americans had told Qatar to get rid of the Hamas offices in Doha, do you think that the Qataris would have said no? Of course not. The same is true in Istanbul. Remember, when Erdogan arrested that pastor, saying that he was involved in the coup, the Americans put a couple of sanctions on Turkey and he kneeled. Erdogan kneeled. And even though he was condemned by Turkish courts in Turkey, Erdogan handed him over to the United States. Do you think if the Americans tell Erdogan to shut down Hamas offices in Turkey that he will say no? Of course not. But this is a lesson learned for people across the world. I'm not talking about the regimes themselves, but people on their payroll, but also ordinary people across the world, that it does not protect you being an agent of the United States, being a proxy of the United States, or if I want to be more kind about it, being, let's say, an ally of the United States, even though none of these countries are allies of the United States, they're all proxies. So in my opinion, Netanyahu has severely damaged the United States. And it has an impact in Iran, a huge impact. The last 2 years have been a learning process for many people in Iran, for the liberals and the youth. The Holocaust in Gaza, then the unprovoked and illegal war, the blitzkrieg that took place as Iran was negotiating. And then even liberals in the West and the Europeans who opposed Trump, they were all supporting this aggression. And the International Atomic Energy Agency lied in order to facilitate the attack and never condemned it. This was all a learning process. But now, the final argument that liberals in Iran make is that if we just change our behavior towards the United States, we will have security. What can Iran do that Qatar hasn't done?
Yeah.
The perfect obedient slave. It has no protection. So this only strengthens the argument put forth by Imam Khomeini and Ayatollah Khamenei after him, that you cannot trust the United States, you cannot trust the empire, and you have to remain steadfast, and you have to be uncompromising on your principles, because the empire is ruthless and it is evil. There's nothing else to take out of this, Nima. There's no way for the Americans to make sense of this for the people across the world. The Americans could have stopped this. There's no doubt that the Americans were involved. The latest ceasefire proposal was given, in my opinion, by the Americans so that the Israelis could carry out this operation. And the Qatari regime, according to CNN, I tweeted this minutes before the attack. CNN had said that Qatar is putting pressure on Hamas to accept the American proposal. So I'm not saying Qatar was involved in the assassination, but they were part of this process to bring these people together. So, and then the Americans would give the green light for the Israeli regime to attack. It's sort of like what happened to Iran. Of course, Iran knew that the Israeli regime was going to attack. I even knew about it from people that they were.
You
we were
told
about
me.
to be
You
attacked.
told me during the program that Israel gonna attack.
Yeah. So, but in any case, the Iranians knew. The Iranians miscalculated in the sense that they didn't think that they were going to go after the leadership. They thought that they were going to attack bases and the nuclear program, and they didn't think they were going to try to carry out a regime change operation, as they call it in the West. But in any case, the Iranians were negotiating. Indirect negotiations were taking place with the Americans as they were conspiring against Iran. And in the case of Qatar, the same thing. Hamas was carrying out ceasefire negotiations when they were attacked by the Israelis with American support. You cannot negotiate with Americans. You cannot negotiate with the Israeli regime for sure. I think this was a catastrophic mistake and miscalculation by the Israeli regime. But again, this serves the interests of Netanyahu and his fanatical allies. But for Israel, it is, I think, catastrophic. For the United States, it is definitely a catastrophic mistake.
Yeah. Pepe, you may add to what Professor Marandi said, but it seems that the attack has failed.
Oh,
And
sorry.
the leader of
After
Hamas.
I just want to exterminate myself, after all that. This is beyond depressing on a cosmic level. Brilliant explanation. There's nothing to add. Okay, question. I'm going to change the subject completely. I'm not in the mood to talk about something that incites us to commit suicide, which is the situation, considering that I came from an extraordinary dinner here in Beijing and I am in a total Chinese mood, but Chinese metaphors escape me to say what we should do about this Zionist bunch. And I prefer not to say it live, but you have a pretty good idea what I would say about it. So once again, I'm drinking to my friend Mao, and I'm going to change the subject to talk something auspicious, at least.
Just before you begin, Pepe, can I just add one thing?
Yeah, go ahead, Professor Marandi.
Because after the Pepe changes the topic, I'll probably be discussing whatever it is that Pepe wants to discuss.
Okay.
I actually think that, and I have to put my words carefully. I have to put my sentences together carefully. I actually think that hopefully no one was martyred. We'll have to see.
Yeah.
We've seen different reports. Obviously, the leader of Hamas, he is a
He's
a
safe and
steadfast
alive.
person, and they want him out. I don't want to go into much detail what the calculations of the Israeli regime are, because maybe they may be trying to take out certain people in the leadership of the political wing of Hamas, and not everyone. They want to change the sort of balance in the political leadership of Hamas. I don't know what their objective is. But there are many different things that you can think of. But I think at the end of the day, ultimately, this strengthens the resistance. This strengthens the axis of resistance, because the logic of the axis of resistance is clear as day for those who want to keep their eyes open, who want to have open eyes. Those who want to, keep their eyes closed and keep them shut. Those people, those intellectuals on the payroll, those religious and cultural centers funded by these regimes in NATO or in the Persian Gulf region. If they want to keep their eyes closed, they can keep it closed. But for everyone else, this is an eye opener. The dirty war in Syria, we saw what happened. We see the regime in the American camp. All of this awakens people to the reality that the only real way forward is the path chosen by the axis of resistance. Everything else is nonsense. Everything else is fake. Everything else is appeasement, and everything else weakens the region and strengthens Zionism and the empire. And I think that being as a servant, an agent, a proxy of the United States, a perfect proxy, and yet being battered this way is an eye opener for many people. People can no longer keep their eyes shut, whether they're working for Qatar in London, or working for the Saudis in Africa, or working for the Emiratis in the Sudan or anywhere else. They are seeing the reality of being a Western proxy and the results of it evolving in front of their eyes. I think that in reality, the martyrdom of people aside, the potential martyrdom of people aside, I think that this hurts the Israeli regime.
I think, Professor
Sorry,
Marandi,
Pepe.
you may mention the difference between the way that the Qatari defense system has responded to Israel's attack, and comparing to what it did during the war between Iran and Israel. They were helping Israel each and every way possible, and today we've learned they used nothing against these.
And how did the airplanes get there?
Yeah.
How did they get there?
From within.
How did all of it's either one of two things. Either the Saudis and the others were complicit, or all those weapons that they purchased for hundreds of billions of dollars, for trillions of dollars, are useless junk. In other words, the Americans have just ripped them off, and they cannot even protect themselves. Sorry, Pepe.
Pepe, let's change the tone to to facilitate your process.
Man, this is so depressing. You have no idea, both of you and our audience. Do you know why I want to change the subject? Because I want to talk about things that are not depressing. Exactly the opposite. Okay. So once again, a toast to my friend Mao. And let's backtrack to last week. You know what I have been doing these past few days? I have been between Russia and China. Obviously, it's the future. So I left NATO Stan to go to Tianjin but I only had a few hours because my flight from Beijing to Vladivostok, I had to go back to the airport to make it to Vladivostok. So I saw a little bit of the SCO summit, not too much, but at least I got the feel of Tianjin and the feel of the summit. So between Sunday and Monday, we had the SCO summit, which was the mirror equivalent of the BRICS summit in Kazan last year in Russia. BRICS last year, they stepped up and they start to show, okay, what are we all about? The SCO this year, they did exactly the same thing, including some of the major players on both. And that's where we get to the absolutely extraordinary scenes between the former Primakov Triangle, Russia, India, and China, RIC, where we have the leaders talking to each other, holding hands, and laughing in the corridors, and making jokes about you know who, probably. So this was the image that went all over the global south, where it was met with glee, of course, and in the global north with what else? You know, spasms of desperation. Of course, how come RIC are talking like this, you know, so chummy with each other? So this was just the first 2 days. Nobody knew what would happen the next day, which was even more important. Vladimir Putin gets to Beijing, comes here to Beijing, is received at the Zhonghanai, official residence of the presidency of China, former imperial palace. If you have an audience at the Zhonghanai and a private conversation at Zhonghanai, this is the top of the top of the top of the top level. Nothing is topper than that. So Putin and Xi on Tuesday, the day after the end of the SCO in Tianjin, they reviewed the Russia-China strategic partnership in detail, and that was the preparation for the day after, where we had the parade once again here, 80 years of the victory against Japanese aggression and the Asian chapter of Nazi fascism, including, of course, something that nobody in the bloody West knows, the staggering amount of Chinese victims, could be as much as 20 million in the war. Nobody in the West, apart from a few scholars, know about this in detail. And of course, it was not a show off by the Chinese. It was basically a self-confident superpower for the first time, showing what they have in case they are attacked. Oh, you want to attack us? Okay, bring it on. We are ready. This was the very polite, sophisticated message in a parade choreographed to perfection. Absolutely impeccable, so rich. So I went to an exhibition this weekend on the Dunhuang cultural and art, the Mogao caves, the refinement that you see in a culture that can stage an exhibition about the early centuries of the Silk Road, in fact. Such finesse, so profound. It was replicated in a sense in this parade that was a beautiful thing to watch, and it was not aggressive. Even with all those lethal weapons being paraded, it was not aggressive at all. And in fact, ended with that, I would say, even a childish, playful game of having fighter jets design 80 in the blue skies over Beijing on that day, you know. So there was something absolutely startling to watch. And I'm here for 4 days now, so I had time to talk to some people in Beijing, and people were amazed, and at the same time, which was something that we were discussing only a few minutes ago before I joined you guys in our dinner. One of the scholars told me, we were very insecure before. We're not self-confident enough. And like, the Chinese had a sort of inferiority complex vis-a-vis the West. But maybe we're starting to surpass it. Maybe we're getting to the next level. And what happened between Tianjin and the parade in Beijing in a matter of 2 days, that was the auspicious part of I was trying to impress to you, and I hope to our audience. And I was deeply moved because I couldn't see the parade because I made a choice to be at the Vladivostok Forum. I think was the right decision, because then what I saw in Vladivostok after these few hours in Tianjin during the whole week was as startling as what happened in Tianjin and in Beijing. I saw essentially the Russian leadership fully committed not only to develop the Arctic and the Far East, the whole gigantic east of Siberia area, but now they are creating a new logistics corridor. They are creating a logistics corridor for Northeast Asia, what the Chinese appropriately define as the Arctic Silk Road. The Russian denomination, Northern Sea Route, is the Chinese denomination is catchy, and it gives you the spirit and the dream built in conquering the Arctic, conquering Siberia, finally turning it into a connectivity corridor. And it's the connectivity corridor of the 21st century, the connectivity corridor of the future. So the most important roundtables in Vladivostok is an exceptional forum. Only if you go there, you understand. Because you see everybody that lives east of the Urals represented, including the native populations, the original populations. You see provincial governors, you see the heads of the big corporations that are investing in the eastern part of Russia, which is that it's gigantic, 10 times bigger than Europe. And you can talk to them and you can see them if they believe in this dream, which is the Russian equivalent of what the Chinese started to do in 1999 with their Go West campaign, which was basically to expand development to Tibet and Xinjiang, especially. The Russians are doing what the Chinese did from east to west. The Russians are doing from west to east, which is the Arctic and the Far East, and to invest as much as they can, turn it into high-tech economies in all these different oblasts, and at the same time create conditions. For instance, in some of the roundtables, there were lots of South Korean businessmen, not only Russians and Chinese. South Koreans were there as well. Mongolians were there as well. Mongolians for obvious reasons, because the power of Siberia too. The announcement that they clinched the deal, the announcement came during the Vladivostok Forum. So this is the oil and gas which Siberia and the Arctic have in spades, plus the connectivity corridor, which is, how can you establish a connectivity corridor in the Arctic? Because you need a fleet of nuclear icebreakers. Who's the only country on the planet who has a fleet of nuclear icebreakers? 8 already on, 2 being built, another 2 in the pipeline, not to mention the other ones which are not nuclear. This means 365 days a week, 24/7, this connectivity corridor will be on perhaps by 2026, 2027. So in one of the, just to give an idea, in one of the panels, the CEO of Rosatom, which is the nuclear state company in Russia, he gave a half an hour detailed breakdown of what they're planning to do and the challenges as well, including we need to find money for all that. It's not only because the federal government is deeply implicated, because Putin considers this also a personal project. He's personally implicated. He sees this as a matter of national security and the great development project for Russia in the 21st century. This is enormous, enormous. So, the first part of the plenary, for instance, past Friday was the plenary session. Putin, of course, gives his speech. The first part of his speech was about that. And then he comes to the clincher. And the clincher is, he has this beautiful formulation, the trans-Arctic corridor. The trans-Arctic corridor is going to be the Suez Canal of the 21st century. And the Russians are in the lead, and the Russians are building it. Of course, the Chinese want to get into the actions. The South Koreans want to get into the action. Even the North Koreans as well. Kim Jong-un and Putin, they also talked about the Arctic Silk Road when they met face to face. So this is the whole auspicious game, which is in direct contrast with what Mohammad explained brilliantly, which, our reaction as not as geopolitical analysts, as human beings, is this is beyond depressing. Is there a solution? Yes, there is. We all know what the solution is. Unfortunately, it's not going to happen. To get rid of this death cult. The thing is, how the planet is going to get rid of the death cult. It's not going to be the UN. I'm sorry, it's not going to be an extraordinary BRICS meeting like we had yesterday, which was pretty lame, to tell you the truth. Although we didn't have what Putin said. That was particularly interesting. The Kremlin vetoed that Putin's words should circulate. So he probably said something very, very hardcore, and the Kremlin prefers to keep it under wraps. So we saw what Lula said, platitudes, I'm sorry. We saw what Xi Jinping said, also platitudes, I'm sorry. But Putin probably said the real deal, and we don't know what it was. But it was probably a call to arms, metaphorically, for BRICS, like, guys, now we need to get our act together. Otherwise, they're going to come after all of us one by one, which is what the Americans are already doing it. And BRICS partners as well. There's a color revolution going on in Indonesia as we speak. There's a color revolution started in Nepal as we speak. So at least I prefer to leave you, all of you, our audience, with this extraordinary, auspicious Russia-China Eurasia-wide week last week, which this one changed the rules of the game. The game now is on a whole new level. The Americans have absolutely no idea how this is going to proceed. The only thing, for instance, that registers in the mind of the circus ringmaster in Washington is, maybe we can do a lot of new deals with Russia. Try to get new deals with Rosatom or even with Rosneft. I confirmed this in Vladivostok. ExxonMobil and Rosneft, they have been talking for 6 months already over the possibility of coming back to the Sakhalin gas project and other investments in oil and gas in Russia. So try to get American oligarchy, essentially, to do business with the Russian oligarchy again, without solving all the major problems in the Russia-US strategic or non-strategic partnership, including the subtext, which happens to be the war in Ukraine. It's not going to happen. But this is the only thing that registers in Trump's mind. In fact, Trump wants to continue to talk to Putin because let's open the Arctic for American business. Forget it. If you don't make serious concessions, which you won't, because the deep state then will literally put a bullet in your neck, it's not going to happen. But the Russians are masters of, I would say, the Russians using a Brazilian swing with Trump, and it works. It works because it leaves Trump even more dazed and confused than he actually is all the time. But the most important thing that happened last week is this was a game changer. And it was a game changer in conjunction. The SCO, the proposal of global governance by President Xi, the face-to-face between Putin and Xi here in Beijing, the parade here in Beijing the next day, and everything that was discussed in Vladivostok, where Eurasia was there all over the place. Huge presence from South Asia, from Southeast Asia, not unfortunately, Mohammad and Nima, from West Asia. There were not many Iranians in Vladivostok this year, of course, because Iran has some serious problems to solve at home and the possibility of a new attack, probably in conjunction US Israel. And some Africans as well, very few Latin Americans, but this was a Eurasia forum. It's like this was the Eurasia Forum complementing the SCO Geopolitical Forum. So this was the geoeconomic arm for a lot of Eurasia on our next steps. There you go, guys.
Yeah.
Once again,
But
Mao Zedong, the revolution is not a dinner party, but it can start with a teacup or a summit in Vladivostok.
Professor Marandi, I think what Pepe mentioned at the end, in the end of what he said, it was the attack on Iran. And here is what the head of Yemen's Supreme Political Council, Mahdi al Mashad, said. The Israeli attack on Doha will be repeated and on a large scale across the region if we don't unite to confront the Zionist threat. One front on you, when you think of Iran, one front would be the way that Iran sees China, Russia, and BRICS and SCO summit to somehow gain some sort of momentum in terms of the economy and security. But the other part would be regional, as the head of Yemen's Supreme Political Council said. Your take on that?
Well, Pepe explained what's been going on over the past week perfectly. And I think that this was also an excellent opportunity for the Iranians and the Chinese and the Iranians and the Russians to speak. The President Pezeshkian had a very long private meeting with President Putin. It was 2 hours, and taking into account all the things that were going on, 2 hours is a very long time during those 3-4 days where you had almost 30 heads of state in China. And also the Iranians had some very good agreements with the Chinese about economic cooperation, investment, and the two countries, I think, are going to be moving closer to each other. And ironically, I think that what happened in Qatar strengthens this bond even further, because it just shows, again, that negotiating with the United States is useless. You can be Qatar and still be bombed, and let alone Iran. What can Iran do to make the United States behave normally, behave like a normal country? What can it do to make the Europeans behave like normal human beings? Nothing. It's not doable. Qatar is the most obedient of all the servants of the United States in the world. They pay off the Americans and the Europeans like no one else. Elites, politicians, diplomats, journalists, everyone, when they go to Qatar, They stay at the best hotels. Anyway, the point
Everybody
is
handsomely paid. All of them.
exactly. I remember once I was at a hotel in Qatar. I was invited by Al Jazeera there, and I won't name the hotel, but it's one of the well-known hotels. And I went upstairs for breakfast in the morning, and there was this massive breakfast, as in like, but this was better than ordinary five-star hotels. And I was the only person there. No one was there. And I had like five young men and women standing there waiting on me. And it was like uncomfortable. I wanted to eat something. They were all waiting to see what they could do for me. What more can Qatar give? And Qatar is moving in a direction where ultimately, when the energy is depleted or whenever it will be a wasteland because they're not doing anything to make it like a Singapore. And the same is true with the Emirates, by the way. Everything looks nice and fantastic, but they're not developing it as a real country. They're not, there's no power. The power that exists comes from NATO. It comes from the United States. If that is withdrawn, it's empty. It's an empty shell. All of these regimes are empty shells. Even Turkey, its economy is structured in a way that if the Americans pull the plug, it goes down. They cannot tolerate sanctions, and it's bound to the West. The SCO provides this alternative, and the SCO is becoming like BRICS, as we all know now. The SCO wasn't initially designed to become. You see BRICS moving towards the SCO, and the SCO moving towards the BRICS.
Absolutely.
And that I think is very important for the months ahead and the years ahead. You know, I have a personal experience which I think is relevant to our discussion. When the nuclear negotiations were taking place between Iran and the P5+1 or the P4+1 with the Americans in the back room in Vienna during President Raisi's time in office, I said the war, in the middle of the negotiations, the war in Ukraine began. And I told Western journalists and elites who would come in to have a conversation in Vienna that winter is approaching for the Europeans because they've cut off trade, but more importantly, they've cut off their energy relationship with Russia. And if they want to have energy security, they need to do a deal with Iran. That way they can invest in Iranian oil and gas, and their future is secure. Well, the Europeans, being the weaklings that they are, they agreed, and we had its final text, and then it went to the Americans, and they balked. Biden didn't. It was approaching the midterms, and even though the head of the EU foreign policy chief at the time said this is a good deal, this text is good, and hopefully the Americans will accept, Biden didn't sign on to it, and then we had the color revolution in Iran, or the attempt for a color revolution. It was never anything very big, but it had nothing to do with Mahsa Amini, the poor young lady. And there was never any evidence that she was beaten. The footage doesn't show that. The evidence of it was about, tilting towards the West. A lot of young people, they believe the Western narrative that if you just do a deal with the West, everything will be fine, and then the economy will be normal, and they'll treat you as friends. And as I said, the last 2 years have changed everything. Young students of mine, sort of approach me in the hallways nowadays, and they want to sort of say, I was wrong, or some of my previous students would contact me and say I was wrong, or they would, they send me messages and say, we were mistaken and you were right. Everything has changed as a result of the events over the past 2 years, and the mentality of many people has changed. But in any case, then we had the riots in Tehran and in other cities. so-called woman life freedom attempt for, color revolution attempt. And the Europeans and the Americans, their calculations changed and they didn't do the deal. Well, now we have a second pipeline that is agreed upon between the Russians and the Chinese, the Siberia 2. Where is the gas going to come from? It's going to come from those areas which are exporting gas to Europe. In other words,
from Yamal Peninsula, it was supposed
exactly.
to supply the Nord Streams, and now it's going to supply China.
Yeah, so even if tomorrow the Europeans decide that, look, we will have to mend ties with Putin, it's too late.
Too late.
You've lost. In 5 years' time, in 2030, if things go as planned, those supplies, they will be committed to China. So right now, the Europeans are already facing an energy crisis. We see the deindustrialization of Germany and Northern Europe, and that is going to continue. And they are bound to the United States, and they're going to have to receive very expensive American gas, thanks to the thuggish US president. But in 5 years, it's going to be worse than now. So Europe has signed its own death warrant. It has destroyed its economy. And it could have had that deal with Iran. If they had that deal, imagine how things would be now. They would have invested in Iran's gas. Iran has the second largest gas reserves after Russia. It would have invested in Iran's oil, and they would have escaped this crisis. But they burnt their bridges with the Russians. They burnt their bridges with the Iranians. They burnt their bridges with the Chinese. And so the fate of Europe is sealed. It has no future. Europe is finished unless something extraordinary happens, which none of us can tell the future. But exactly. But Europe is finished. They've done it to themselves. Their obedience to the United States, their arrogance to Iran and the Russians and the Chinese, but most importantly, their blind obedience to the United States has pushed them to the stage. So this winter, this European winter, I just read I think it was Political. I didn't read the article, but they said the century of the European century of sorry,
humiliation.
Yes, like the Chinese century of humiliation, the European century of humiliation.
Starting now.
Exactly.
Yeah. Pepe, I think what Professor Marandi said about Europe, and we learned that the European representative went to Washington to talk with Donald Trump and his administration in terms of putting more pressure on Russia. And we had Lotnik suggesting to India, if you want to be closer to the United States, I'm talking about the Secretary of Trade in the United States, he said that you may leave BRICS. You're unbelievable. The suggestion.
No, 3 conditions. There were 3 conditions.
Yeah.
Yeah, strengthening the dollar was also one of them. It's amazing, the arrogance of these people. Yeah, sorry.
Yeah.
We should stop paying attention to these idiots. Come on, these people cannot run a hot dog stand. They are posing as government officials and all that. It's ridiculous. But Europeans, nobody in Europe pays attention to them in Europe, apart from the brainwashed section of especially the Brits, the Germans, and the French. For instance, the Italians, they don't pay attention to them anymore. But Italians they have that anarchic streak, and of course they know how to live. They take care of their lives and improve their lives, and they don't care about government, any form of government or politicians for that matter. But I would say the serial suicide of Europe now, it's becoming a cartoon. They are becoming a parody of their own disaster, in fact. And it's one day after another. Whenever one of these idiots open their mouths, it's always the same. That piece of stale Gouda, which passes for NATO Secretary General, one of the most stupid Dutchmen in history. And I can tell you that because my dad's family is Dutch. So I know a little bit about these people. What did he say the other day? It was something so outlandish. And of course, they turn it upside down. Just like, oh shit, the Estonian batshit crazy woman.
I thought maybe you you wanted to say about something about Finland winning the Second World War or something like that.
No, that was even worse. This came from a Finnish guy, actually, something along these lines. So why pay attention to all of Trump? At least Trump has this.
Or sorry, the Europe, China not being good at social sciences.
Yeah, exactly.
Kaya
said that.
The Estonian batshit craziness. China is not good at social sciences. I got. If you take this imbecile to Fudan University in Shanghai, for instance, she cannot even clean the floors in Fudan University, which is one of the, like Mohammad knows, is one of the best universities in China for social sciences, by the way. So it's a waste of everybody's time. In fact, Europeans they don't care. Like I spent a little bit of time in France before coming back to Russia and Asia, and I love talking to average people, normal people who don't follow politics, whatever. Fishermen in Brittany, that kind of stuff. Farmers in Normandy, that. And I said, well, we don't give up about these people. And they don't represent us. And first of all, they hate France as a nation state. They hate French culture. They don't represent us. They just follow Brussels diktats blindly, and they want to rip us blind in terms of taxes, in terms of destroying what's left of the welfare state, which is exactly one of the reasons why the latest French government just collapsed 1 or 2 days ago. Absolutely.
And the IMF may be visiting them shortly.
You bet. Exactly. And it's so startling when you compare the moral turpitude, the moral decay, the intellectual decay of Europe. And then you take a plane and you arrive here in Beijing and you see, wow, a renewed self-confident superpower. But it's beyond. I haven't been able to process it. I arrived from Europe a little over a week ago, and I'm still startled making the comparisons. Your brain is turned upside down. For instance, there were what, 3 or 4? There were no Europeans in Vladivostok. Zero, nothing. Not to mention their media. I don't remember seeing any European media in Vladivostok. So the future is being forged in Eurasia, in East Asia, and they are completely oblivious to it. It's like they resign themselves to lose the race to become relevant in the 21st century. We have nothing to offer. And in fact, they don't have nothing to offer the planet. Not only they don't have anything to offer to their own citizens in the nation states of the EU, can you imagine to the rest of the planet? And that leaves us what? The Estonian batshit crazy opening her mouth and embarrassing 450 million European voters every time that she opens her mouth. Wow. And another thing in China that, the conversations that I had these 3-4 days here, some of really, really top intellectuals, the Chinese intelligentsia, and they're still very modest. They don't brag about anything. Even the fact that now they are inside the leader of the 21st century, period, geopolitically and geoeconomically. But, it's always, no, we have to do better. We're not strong enough. Okay, now we have to explain to most of our population why the leadership is feeling self-confident that China has to be more assertive in international relations and all that. They don't brag about anything. It's quite impressive. And these are very, very well-educated people, travel people. They know the West as well. So this sense of humility, and it's fascinating. And you compare once again with what Muhammad was saying a while ago, the arrogance cum ignorance of the so-called political elites in the West. But in the case of the US, is reaching intergalactic levels. When you have the imbecile that coined the tariff war saying openly that Russia, China, and India are blood suckers, how can you respond to that? It's the peak of imbecility, and relatively important government official.
Yeah, it's not that strange. This sort of behavior that you mentioned, Pepe, is not that strange for Iranians. I believe that, because the humbleness is part of the culture of the Eastern countries, Professor Marandi, isn't it?
Yeah, so I mean, the problem that the West has, of course, has always been its arrogance. That's been I actually think that if it wasn't for the collapse of the Soviet Union, the West wouldn't be in such a sorry shape today. But their arrogance only expanded. It got worse in the 1990s, and they really thought that this was the end of history. Even when Fukuyama pulled back his
yes,
yeah, and even when Fukuyama sort of pulled back on that notion, it was the general perception that this is the and it was something that influenced the rest of the world. A lot of people who were critical of the West, they tilted towards the West. A lot of people gave up their ideology of resistance. Even in Iran, some of those people who were the most critical of the United States in the 1980s and the early 1990s, they flipped and they became liberals and pro-Western. So the United States, the Europeans, they had everything. And if you go back to the 1990s, it's like a completely different world from what we're seeing today. Completely different. And they became extra arrogant. They've been arrogant for centuries. It was a Eurocentric world. You can read their Orientalist works, whether it's on Russia or our region or what they called the Far East. Even the terms, the Far East, the Middle East, the Near East, it's all Eurocentric. It's empire, the language of empire. But in any case, their arrogance was always there. But now the arrogance is founded upon emptiness. It's an empty shell. Pepe has been around China. He says how impressive Beijing is. Beijing is the least impressive major city of China that I've ever visited. So if Beijing is impressive, I was in Tianjin a couple of weeks ago. For the first time, I'd never been there before. Very impressive.
It is
Shanghai or Guangzhou or Shenzhen or Chengdu or
Chongqing.
It's Chongqing. Oh, beautiful city. Or Ningbo. All of them more impressive than Beijing to me. So, and all of them decades ahead of anything I've seen in Europe or in the West. Decades ahead.
Wow.
And the gap is growing. And again, going back to the future of Europe, and the same is true with the United States, but in a different way. And even though the United States under Trump is increasingly pushing Europe towards the abyss, it's going to hurt the United States, because if you destroy your own allies, that makes you weak. An empire needs powerful allies. An
Mhm.
empire doesn't need allies that it has to carry, impoverished and broken allies. The United States, I mean, their own economic crises at home, which is going to hit them pretty soon. I mean, it's already there, but it's going to get worse in the United States. There's no doubt about that. Something that Pepe has been talking about, and others like Alice or Crook have been talking about for years. The United
Mhm.
States is going downhill. It's going to go downhill further. But even if you put that aside, the decline of Europe is itself the decline of the empire. It's the decline of the United States, because, as I said, the empire needs powerful allies. So China is way ahead of Europe, but they look down upon it. These Chinese, they're not good at social sciences. The Russians are not good. The Iranians, of course, are. Well, the Iranian missiles, they defeated the Israeli regime, even though all those bases in the Persian Gulf and Turkey and the airspace of Iraq and Jordan were used by the Israelis, and the entire US and European air defense systems were there to help the Israelis, and their weapons were there to help the Israelis offensively, defensively, and offensively. The Israeli regime lost. They lost to young Iranian engineers. They lost to young, uh, camel jockeys and towel heads from Iran.
Mm.
Their empire is an empty shell. Their arrogance today is completely unjustified. In the past, when they had the top economy in the world, or the top economies in the world, in the decades ago, arrogance, of course, is never a positive trait, but at least they had something to be arrogant about. Now they
About,
have
yeah.
nothing. Now they have nothing.
Yeah, exactly. Thank you so much, Professor Marandi and Pep. Great pleasure.
Thanks. The two
Great
coolest
speaking to you
persons
both.
ever.
And the best Brazilian, too.
No. I subscribe to my when in doubt, talk to Mao.
Which also, if people, one of the key points of the whole parade was President Xi's speech.
Yes.
And he
Yes,
spoke of, yes, and I think where he mentions Mao, I think that's something that people have to take a closer look at.
yeah.
I bought his latest book, Modernization of China, which is a collection of quotes from several speeches for the past, in fact, since 2012, in fact. And it's fascinating because years ago, he was already talking about global governance. It didn't come out this past 2 or 3 years. He was already talking about it in 2015, 2016. So it shows a consistency. Nah? And it's fascinating. Today, I revisited the bell tower and the drum tower. And it's fascinating. Total Chinese. They describe it from the Yuan dynasty to the Ming and then to the Qing, architecture as music. And they also make a parallel with good governance. And then obviously I started, okay, I'm going to try to write a column trying to link architecture, music, imperial dynasties in China, global governance, and what happened last week here in Beijing. Let's see if I can pull it up. Yeah.
Well, Pepe, something that many people don't know is that before the Century of Humiliation, not the European one that's beginning, but before the Chinese Century of Humiliation, they were the largest economy in the world.
Yes, until 1750, roughly, 1750, 1760. So this predominance of the West is 250 years. It's not much. It was never 500 years.
Yeah.
So in history terms, this is a speck of sand. It's nothing. And now it's coming back to what it was. Eurasia as the center of the economic activity on the planet. So natural, isn't it?
Yeah. Thank you so much, both of you.
Thank you, guys. You totally
Thank
rock.
you for having me.
Not as much as Mao, but you totally rock. Cheers. Bye-bye. Cheers.